Have you ever stopped to think about the fact that inside of you, right this second, there's a whole universe at work? A bustling, coordinated world in every single part of you? Well, today, we're diving deep into that universe. We're zooming way, way in to look at the cell, the basic building block of, well, you, me, and literally every living thing on the planet. Okay, so let's start with a bit of a riddle. What on earth could you, a massive redwood tree that's hundreds of feet tall, and a tiny little bacterium you can't even see, what could you all possibly have in common? The answer is cells. It's the one thing that connects all life as we know it.
You know, it's funny, for most of human history, this entire world was totally invisible to us. It was completely hidden. So before we could even start to figure out what cells do, we first had to discover that they even existed. And that took some pretty clever people and some game-changing inventions.
Yeah, our understanding didn't just pop up overnight. It was a journey. It all kicked off back in 1665 when Robert Hooke looked at a piece of cork under a microscope and saw these tiny little boxes he called cells. Then things got really interesting when Anton von Leeuwenhoek discovered this whole invisible world of tiny swimming microorganisms. The idea really took off in the 1830s when Schleiden and Schwann had this huge realization. Wait a minute, all plants and all animals are made of these things? And then Rudolf Virchow came in and added the final crucial piece of the puzzle. Cells have to come from other cells.
So you take all of those incredible discoveries and you put them together and you get what we now call the cell theory. And you can just think of it as the official rule book for life. There are 3 main rules, and honestly, they're the foundation for all of biology.
All right, rule number 1. It sounds simple, but it's huge. All living things are made of 1 or more cells. I mean, that's everything, from a single-celled amoeba to the trillions, literally trillions, of cells that make you up. The cell is the common thread.
Okay, rule number 2 goes a little deeper. The cell is the basic unit of structure and function. So what does that actually mean? It means a single cell is the smallest possible thing that we can consider to be fully alive. It's the most basic package that can do everything life requires.
And that brings us to the third and final rule, which builds right on what Virchow figured out. All cells come from pre-existing cells. They don't just magically appear out of thin air. Life creates more life, all through this incredible, continuous process of cells dividing.
So, we've got the rules. All life plays by these rules. But it turns out there isn't just one way to build a living thing. There are actually 2 completely different blueprints for how to design a cell. You've got your simple economy model, and then you've got the much more complex luxury version.
So let's meet our 2 main characters. On one side, you've got the simple, streamlined prokaryote, and on the other, you have the more complicated, organized eukaryote. Let's really dig into what makes them so different.
Wow, yeah, you can see the difference right away, can't you? The prokaryotic cell on the left, it's kind of like a one-room studio apartment. Everything's just sort of floating around together. But the eukaryotic cell on the right, that's a mansion. It's full of different rooms, walls, specialized structures, and every single one has a very specific job to do. That organization is everything.
And really, it all boils down to this. Eukaryotes, that's what your cells are, by the way, they have a true nucleus, like a safe, to protect their precious DNA. And they have a ton of these other little compartments called organelles. Prokaryotes, on the other hand, just kind of let their DNA float around inside, and they don't bother with all that fancy internal structure.
Now, to really get a feel for how a complex eukaryotic cell works, we're going to use an analogy. Let's stop thinking of it as just a blob of jelly and instead picture it as a tiny, bustling city. It's got different buildings, departments, and workers, all humming along together. So let's take a tour.
Okay, here's our map of the city. This is a pretty standard animal cell. Every single one of these labeled parts, these organelles, is like a different building or facility in our city. We're going to pop in and visit a few of the most important spots.
Our first stop has to be City Hall, the nucleus. This is the command center, the main office. It carefully guards the DNA, which is like the master blueprints for the entire city, and it sends out all the orders for everything that happens. Nothing gets done without the nucleus giving the okay.
All right, next up, the power plants. These are the mitochondria. And let me tell you, without these guys, the lights in our city would go out instantly. They are working around the clock 24/7, turning food into usable energy, this molecule called ATP that powers every single thing the cell does.
And you see all these tiny little dots everywhere? Those are the ribosomes. Now, they might look small, but they are the factories of our cell city. They get the instructions sent over from the nucleus, and they get to work building proteins. And proteins are the workers, the machines, and even the building materials of the cell. They do everything.
Okay, so we've toured the city's main buildings, we've seen City Hall, the power plants, and the factories. But that brings up a really important question. How does all the actual work get done? I mean, how do millions of chemical reactions happen fast enough to keep this whole city, this whole organism alive?
So who are the workers? They're not these big structures like the organelles we just visited. No, they are the city's hyper-efficient workforce, a special kind of protein called an enzyme.
Enzymes are basically nature's perfect little workers. They're what we call catalysts, which is just a fancy way of saying their job is to make chemical reactions happen way, way faster, sometimes millions of times faster. And they are total specialists.
For
one
more
enzyme
content
usually
like
does
this,
one very
subscribe to
specific job.
Paperful.
And maybe the coolest part for the cell, they are completely reusable.
The absolute best way to think about how specific they are is the lock and key model. So picture the enzyme as a lock. It has this perfectly shaped little pocket called the active site. The molecule it's designed to work on, we call that the substrate, is the key. And just like with a real lock, only the one perfectly shaped key is going to fit.
And the whole process is just unbelievably efficient. The substrate, the key, finds its way into the active site, the enzyme does its thing, makes a change, and then it releases the finished products. And here's the crucial part, the enzyme itself is totally unchanged. It's immediately ready to grab another substrate and do it all over again. It's the ultimate tool.
When you see how insanely complex this city is, it just makes you wonder, where did it all come from? How did life even get started from just non-living stuff? Well, the famous Miller-Urey experiment gave us a big clue. They basically recreated the conditions of the early Earth in a lab. Simple gases, some water, and sparks for lightning, and they discovered that the basic building blocks of life, like amino acids, could actually form all on their own.
And that leaves us with one final, absolutely mind-bending question to think about. The factories need the instructions from City Hall, but City Hall needs energy from the power plants, and the power plants need parts built by the factories. You see the problem? The whole system has to work together. So if all the parts are needed for the cell to function, how in the world did the very first, simplest cell ever get started? It's one of the biggest mysteries in all of science. Something to chew on. Thanks for touring the world inside a cell with me.